everyone. I hope everybody's doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. As always, thank you to all for everyone's words, wishes, prayers, as the love and support everyone shares and sends my way. From the heart, I appreciate every one of you. Also, do please like, share, subscribe, and hype to this video to help push the message out a little bit more. Also, thank you to everyone for your company in the interview I just recently had, as well for the great support when it comes to the message in the form of the book and Kindle, and for taking time out of your day to circle back around and leave your review. Do know I highly appreciate it. Well, everyone, getting right into what I want to speak on today. This one is more so of a story, right? And I ain't nobody to judge the man, nor did he belong to our movement, right? But nevertheless, I thought it would be something to share that someone or most of us, well, I shouldn't say, shouldn't include me. I only did 14 years. In reality, that's just a skip and a hop compared to some individuals, right? But, a lot of people don't really talk about how the struggle really was for some individuals, right? Not speaking as a whole, the mindset of them, people that were back there for 20, 25 years, 30 years. And in this one, I want to touch about a neighbor I had in Pelican Bay. He was a BGF member. You know, I'll just refer to him as B from Oakland. I don't want to sound disrespectful. He had a African name, right? That he went by, and I don't want to butcher it. I don't want to sound disrespectful, right? So I'll just go with B. He had been down since the 70s. He had been slammed on the first buses up to Pelican Bay. This is 2007, I believe. So he had already been down there close to 20 years, right? And like I mentioned before, Pelican Bay, or in any shoe for that matter, there ain't no room for self soldiering from you speaking out your neck while you have a metal thing between you two, right? And you can't put hands on each other or steal, whatever it leads to. So you come to appreciate your neighbors, and you really do, regardless of who it is, white, norteño, bulldog, camarada, in this case, a brother. It's just, you're back there, even if you're in separate cells, you're going through the same struggles day in, day out, you know. And anyways, I will get real familiar with B, and we would talk. We share events, so we would conversate. And he took me on some trips. Sincerely, it's just the way of the mindset was back in the days, and the way things would change, within time. And I know it took generations and time and them talking about the big fours pushing lines and seeing how far they could go and taking it from there. But to me, it was always a trip. For example, he told me that when they were on the main line, their whole movement was anti-government, right? Basically, they were revolutionaries, which I think that's what it should have been, right? For everyone. Then they were locked up, but he had some cool experiences, like for example with Bullet for Menace and some other carnales that you don't really hear about, because they ain't around no more. And even though I heard stories from our angle, right, from Raul, because he was down since the late 60s, early 70s, but it's just different perspective. Me personally, I always like to listen, and he would tell me also on how our people change, right? And when he was speaking about our people, he's referring to Pilis. You know, for example, they took control of a yard, and there was real famous, I guess, back in them days, to push punks, and they will fight for them straight till death. Basically, you take my punk and you're taking my money because they will rent them out, right, to different factions. It wasn't to what it will become. For example, we walk the yard with brothers, but it's a known fact we can't make deals with them, to prevent problems. And back then there was no such thing. Yeah, whoever had good dope, good money, but he would speak before he would hear, about the South Side movement that would come later on, right? How there was some individuals. I don't want to name him by name, right? But more so because I wasn't around. It ain't my personal story, right? But how they would get cellies that were young, wet behind the ears, and by the form of violence, they would, you know, turn around their police and start giving up the manhood, and they would start pimping them out to make money. Which I think that's scandalous, right? At the end of the day, it was, even though it wasn't camaradas, there was no hierarchy, whatever. We weren't around. At the end of the day, it was still raza, right? I mean, after all, they are formed for the benefit of the gente, right? That's what they make believe. They were formed to protect the gente. And, that's something a lot of people don't speak on. There was a cool person, individual that used to have Mundo's channel. And whenever he would put out an old timers from the MS profile, he would touch on that. He would put it out. And since he's older, he was well aware of it on how it was, right? And I think that's very important because, one abuse jumped into the next, but I don't want to jump into us, right? I go back to B. He also shared with me, he had not been able to touch his mother, his family. He had a daughter, I remember, for very, very long. And at the end of the day, they were being pushed out. Maybe not in the direct sense of it, but on the indirect. And I'm not the correct person to really touch on why the BGF never took control of the black population the way other organizations did. But the way it was told to me, it basically had to do with cribs, right? They put a stop to it, and they weren't gonna fall underneath them, and they just weren't revolutionaries. They were gangsters, cribs, right? Which in a sense is understandable. But he wasn't gonna go out sideways. How can you go from a revolution, excuse me, everyone, from being a revolutionary for your people to next thing you know, you sit down with a microphone or recorder in between to start telling everything start helping them folks, them gente. And I respected that. You know, in him, I actually was the one I seen a lot on how within time everybody stops coming around. You know, family. Yes, family gets tired of you too. You being busted and in a sense being a weight. Sorry I say it like that. And even writing a letter becomes heavy. Let's just be sincere. The world spins when you're out here, work, kids. So when do you have time to sit down and write a letter? You know, it becomes hard. Not because they don't want to, it just becomes an issue, right? And friends, that's out the window, you know. And it's not because he ever complained about it. I'm sincere, I just seen it. He got a visit once a month, if lucky. And daughter already had kids. And it was like once a year he got to see his grandkids. So just imagine that. You see your grandkids one time, the next time you see them, they're completely different. A year's a long time for a child in the form of changes and stores starts being thinner. You start struggling. People start paying attention to you. Even for the BGF, I can sincerely say they didn't really communicate like that amongst each other no more in the shoe. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't for the lack of wanting to. They were tired of being slammed. It's just sincerely. At the end of the day, for example, us, it's because we were active. Even the senores, they were behind that wall because they were active, still getting caught with sending out directives, and us for getting caught moving them directives, right? As other factions. But them, nevertheless, I don't want to make this too long. I'm doing it with all due respect for the brothers, right? Or the black population that hear me. I know you guys know I don't really touch on things outside of my personal walk, but it's real important, that there was individuals back there holding it down, not ever going sideways, and we're not in the mix no more. They were just political prisoners on top of prisoners, because everyone, even us, got that 5 year inactive type of thing, at one point. BGF didn't. So tell me what that was. Nevertheless, Pelican Bay's, it's it's real humble and respectful, but when doors crack, and it's a bell. So on the pod where I was at, there was a Nazi lowrider, and it's the time where they're trying to stay relevant because they're going through their own personal stuff with the abejas, right? The AB. So doors open, and by no means am I saying homeboy wasn't with the business, right? He came out, but he didn't come out with a weapon. He came out to knuckle up, right? Especially when he seen it was that cell, right? But the Nazi lowrider did come out with a weapon, and he would end up getting the best of B. And right after that, they took him out to a hospital. Then he came back, and he just told me like, "Hey, with all due respect, here's this one time. Can you do me a favor and pass it down to another brother that was there, and so he could get it to where it needs to go?" And he goes, "I'm done. I'm done with this. It hurts the heart to do this, but I just can't do this. I go through the headaches, through the struggles, and I'm just not at that age anymore to when these doors pop to deal with situations that really don't belong to me no more." And he would end up telling the CEO I'm walking out. Now I'll end this story with this. I want you guys to your opinion sincerely and with respect. You know, I'm going to pay real close attention. You guys always been respectful, but tell me, after 20 years, do you blame him? Do you blame him after everything I just shared with you for getting tired and going to that side, wanting to hug his mother, his grandkids, when in reality, there just wasn't nothing there for them no more? And again, I don't mean to touch on anything that have not have to do with me. I know it's this topic that belongs to a brother, but I was personally there 3 years at being a vet neighbor of him. He was a cool individual, gave me a lot to learn from, and I just thought I would just share it. With the said, please stay true to yourself and loyal to your loved ones.